For the joint shareholders meeting for the Water Committee, CSI Water. Go to apologies, there is none. We've got Mayor Scott on line. Mayor Scott, you can hear us okay?
Yeah, I can. Thanks, Michael.
Perfect. Thanks, mate. We're going to now go to urgent business. Is there any? No. Minor nature. Just wanted to cover appointments of further directors. We just need to discuss that briefly at a point. I think that needs to be, as you'd alluded to, needs to be brought forward as far as LGFA funding and other things. But it's probably jumps up as far as the list of priorities now, so we can. You comfortable if we just have a chat in minor nature? I think that's probably best place. Yep. Okay. Cool. Conflicts of interest. Sorry. None. There's no chairperson's report for this meeting. We'll go to confirmation of minutes. Minutes 6.1 of the committee meeting on 13th of July. Can I have a mover for that? Councillor Guerin, Councillor Adams. Put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. We've got minutes 6.2, 29th of July. I'm happy to move that from the chair. Councillor Pye. Put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. First report is on 21, which is 7.1. Sorry, I forgot to add, Catherine, we're going to have your report, so we might do it after the actions report, if that's just do it up front. Does that suit you, or do you want to do it in...
I don't mind when we do it. We can probably do it towards...
Do you want it towards the end, or...?
Towards the end's fine.
Yeah, okay. Yep, no, we'll just put it into 7.4, and that's, you're comfortable with that all being public?
Yep.
Yep. No, all good. We'll just call that 7.4. Okay, so actions, register update. The first action is complete, and then there's the Chief Executive discussion. So we have a preferred candidate, and there's just discussions ongoing, but we don't have anything to confirm just yet, so we'll just leave that on the table if you like. So that's probably it as far as the actions. Everyone comfortable with that? Yeah, I'll just move from the chair that we receive a note, the actions register update. Councillor Fisher, get your name back on the board, mate. Welcome back. Oh, yes. That's all right. We'll get your name in there, eh? No worries. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Alrighty, so we go to 7.2, which is Central South Island Water Establishment Program Update, and that is on page 23. Who's leading that one? It's got Rosie's name on it. Who was able to speak to it?
I think probably what I provide at the end in terms of a summary will sort of supersede or complement this one.
Right. What we might do then is just leave that one on the table as far as the report and any action from us needed. Is there any questions? Or let's just wait until what we hear from the Chief Executive.
Just on this, I think we do need to have the conversation about you might want two reports going forward, one from the water entity and one from the councils, because there is a lot of work to be done within council that needs to be done to actually help the water entity get to their place. And I think that we've got to work out how do we actually make sure that the two are actually coming together really well, because what I don't want is a situation where the water entity is waiting for something and we haven't got ourselves organised to actually give it to them, or vice versa. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that this report sort of points to some of that in terms of the status, the current status of it, it's yellow, and cost status and so forth. But we had a bit of a conversation this week and again this morning to say we're going to have to find someone to lead out the council side, and probably that person leading out has to be looking at both councils, not just one, because there's a lot of work to be done.
I agree with Nigel. I think, if you look at all the other work streams that support what's going over to the entity, we've got to make sure that we meet those deadlines that on the entity side or CSR water side, we're providing the information at the right time so that they can get on and do things. So I really do agree with Nigel, and I do think we need someone front-footing that as well, and really giving us a bit of a critical path like we've done with the water program, giving us a bit of a critical path and some key milestones so that we can actually start aiming toward that.
Yeah, I agree. I had a little bit of concern over this particular report when there was so much dependency on structure, service agreements are still unresolved. So much was reliant on that when it came to program scope. So, who is controlling that? And so I agree, someone needs to take some ownership. I would suggest I would suggest you need to figure out who that person is quickly.
And when Catherine points up what she's doing, that actually some of what you're talking about is actually the water entity. You got to wait on those, but there is stuff that, like just getting a list of assets, actually is more to it than that. There's easements, there's consents, there's all sorts of things that have got to be looked at and possibly understood, because some of the consents could actually have liabilities that are getting transferred across to the water entity that need to be thought through. Even the understanding what our people do for water is being worked on now, but actually that is a big chunk of work for the councils, not necessarily the water entity. We've got to understand, how much work we do for water.
I think it's important, though, to understand that the new CE or the preferred candidate may have a view together with their chairman on that person as well. The new CE of the entity, together with the chairman, might have a view on that role as well.
It's more from the council side, I think. It's actually the two CEs have got to get that sorted, Andrew and I.
I agree, but I think it's worth involving these other people as well.
So are we likely to find, as we begin to tease this stuff out, are we likely to find consenting issues that may be, that could add time pressure here? What are we expecting to find as we start?
Well, we don't know.
Example, on the people side of things, just to explain the internal workload, we've actually got to go through our own PDs. We've actually got to tease them apart. We've got to understand, how they map over to the future state. We've got to work through all of that, terms and conditions, et cetera, et cetera. There's quite a lot of work that's got to be done just in unpicking the people side of things, and that's at least 3 months worth of work to meet the deadlines that Amanda Rooney's put in to actually start progressing that work. I suspect it will be the same with assets. It will be the same with, all the easements and all the legal stuff that goes with that. And then likewise, even when we start migrating into systems, there's going to be a whole lot of work in the background that we haven't even thought of. So I think and even the financial stuff, just unpicking that and making sure that we understand what's left with council versus what's going across. There's quite a huge amount of work in that.
We'll cover all of it off towards the end, and Mike can go talk you through the structure around how we're splitting it up between councils and the water entity.
Perfect. And then we just need to be smart as far as reporting what needs to come here, what needs to stay within the entity, and what needs to come back to council. So there's going to be 3 layers of of fun. So we will now go to, so we're just going to park that. We're going to go to 7.3, which is the cost allocation policy and establishment budget, and that is on page 32. Who's got that one? That's you, Catherine, is it?
Yes, that is me, and I wrote and pulled this together initially in isolation to Elliot's shareholder agreement updates or markups. So there's a logical way of going through this that Elliot has worked out that I suggest we follow Elliot's logic, which will then get us to the position where this fits into the shareholders agreement. I want you to add the rest. Okay.
Yeah. Through the chair. So Catherine's, Ms Lancaster's paper is the policy settings. Those policy settings will need to be captured somewhere, and the design of this project is that they would be captured in the shareholders agreement, and then the council will authorise the shareholders agreement. We'll discuss that shareholders agreement further on in this meeting, and just casting forward the interim statement that this committee is tasked with issuing, I see as providing the detailed instructions and understanding between this committee and the company as to those establishment steps, the reporting cadence and content, and any oversight over budget and the particularity of decisions that you want to see. So that should give you a level of governance oversight to then inform this back at home council work so that it works. So that's my description, I think, of the sort of the governance setup and where this policy paper sits. Okay. So they're drafted in isolation. Apologies on that, but we'll get better at that as we work more and more together. The fundamentals of this policy decision are around how the councils want to see the organisation be funded through to a point in time when it has its own income streams, and how you want to set that up. Now, the commitment agreement did address it at a very high level, and so depending on the policy settings, we'd need to change the commitment agreement. That change is a matter for council. I drafted in the shareholders agreement an approach. It's different to Catherine's. Apologies, I'm putting multiple approaches in front of you. I have developed, I've looked at those two approaches and the different options there, and I think that there are 7 steps to work through where we would agree on, firstly, on the scope of the costs that are being covered by this bridge capital, if you will, and the period of time in which that sort of facility was established between councils and the company. We'd then look at the nature of it, whether it's a debt or an equity transaction, and that raises some questions around ensuring that we've got the necessary advice in front of the council to be informed about that. Then we'd need to look at interest. And if a debt basis was chosen, then we'd need to look at the allocation ratio between the two councils, and that's something that actually occurs in 3 other areas in the shareholders agreement that I'll come to, but we should adopt a consistent approach or reasons one. The next dimension would be, I'd suggest a repayment trigger equity mechanism, and that's basically like, how do we wrap this up? And then 6th, ring fencing, and I'm a little bit iffy about the extent to which that actually applies. And then my final dimension actually is just noting that the JSC would resolve a recommended position to go to council as part of varying the commitment agreement to enable it and providing for the mechanism in the shareholders agreement. So if I might just pause there, just because I've kind of gotten quite into the detail about I guess the big rock in Catherine's paper, and just take any questions on that before we get too far into the paper.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, let's get into it. Councillor Pye.
I had a number of questions which may not be relevant anymore, but I'm a little bit confused now on where we're at. So I guess my first question on the paper that is there is, is we talked a lot about being able to recover the establishment costs, and so therefore it should be debt, not equity. So that was my first question, which I think you've now alluded to, and that's a decision that will have to come back based on some advice. Is that what you just said?
No, the shareholders' agreement is drafted on the basis that it is a debt and it would be recovered. So this policy paper is putting up another option, and it's good for you to have the options. The council will sign off on the shareholders' agreement, so whatever they choose will be what we do, but this committee needs to come up with a recommendation, and we can discuss the things to consider in that step of whether or not it is a debt or an equity arrangement.
Without expert advice, my gut feeling would be it should be debt because it gives you more flexibility going forward. You can transfer that debt to equity at a later point if that's what you decide, or it can be repaid, whereas if it's equity, it's a little bit harder, is my understanding, but that's my layman's understanding. And then I kind of got confused with the terminology we were using in this report. We talk about councils carrying the cost. And when we say we carry the cost, do we mean that cost lands on council? So, for example, here it talks about the councils carry 2 months of the salary of the, and the CSI Water carries the rest, and that's talking up to the 1st of July 2027. When you say we carry the cost, do you just mean we're funding it and it will be repaid, or do you mean that cost will land with council? Because in my mind, they were two different things, and I got a little bit confused reading the paper what the intent was.
Yep, sure. So apart from the advice on the transfer agreement from the individual councils, that will be a council carrying cost. The rest is council funding the entity until the entity has its own funding to then be able to incur those costs itself. So apart from those two exceptions, it is a loan. So the cost that it is council is effectively funding or financing it until the organisation has its own funding. Yep, so there's 2 points, there's two potential timeframes here. There is, through the LGFA accession process, there is the opportunity to get establishment funding from them. It might be called transition funding or establishment funding, I'm not sure, which means that as soon as you go through the accession process, the water entity then has its own funding. So that could be the first option, and then the entity would pay back the debt or transfer to equity the costs incurred to date. Or you don't undertake that, don't apply for the establishment transition funding, and then the council continues that process right through to the 1st of July, which is then when you would recover those costs. It's the transition funding effectively gives us working capital to be able to operate independently from the date of accession.
Concerned about that. I'm less concerned about who's funding it, because at the end of the day, the water entity is going to pay for it, whether it's funded by council or funded by LGFA. So I'm less concerned about that. I'm more concerned about what has a hard landing with council versus what has a hard landing with the water entity.
So the costs, and this may come out in my paper a bit later, but effectively in that budget that we've put together, I think we have 40,000 in there, which is 20k each, and that's the costs that will be permanently land with council after separation.
That's what I read and understood, but then I just got a little bit confused with some of the terminology used in the rest of the paper, so that's great.
Yeah.
I actually think that while the costs for establishment will sit in either one or both councils' books until a session or the 1st of July 27, I think we're going to have to talk that through, because we're going to have an employee, and I would have thought that employee would have to go through the Central Waters books, so we need to think that through.
That's the former approach where we do get that establishment funding. That would enable what you were just saying. Yeah. We wouldn't require things to go through your, well, wouldn't it be dependent on bank accounts and those types of things?
It's going to have to go through payroll until you actually got a bank account, and that needs to be thought through.
Yeah.
That's why we need to get a bank account, and we need to get some finance systems up.
I'll just introduce Christine while we're on that note. This is Christine Wright, who's coming in, helping us from the CFO perspective on the whole LGFA financial accession process.
Welcome, Christine. So my next question was at 21.2, I think it might be, and it talks about, well, actually at point 21, it talks about the requirement of funding, and it sits comfortably inside the 2.6 million already committed. And then we go and say the project group's delegated authority is 2.6, being what we've already approved, and this probably comes from my favourite saying of it, it's a budget, not a target. And I'm just wondering, why have we still got that delegated authority so high when you've demonstrated you don't need it? I know we've approved it, but approving something in a budget is different to a delegated authority, and I'm wondering what your view is on that. So at 20.21, we say we only need 1.3 million, and it sits really comfortably inside the 2.6 already committed. So, but then at point 21.2, it's saying that we're giving delegated authority to the project group of the full 2.6, but they've kind of said they don't need it. So
I think what we've got to think about is that attachment 1 is the total cost for the establishment and the transition. I think there is some other costs that are going to rear their heads that need to be added to this, depending on how we do some things, because there are some things that have still got to be worked through that could create additional costs.
okay. So I'm comfortable with that, but from a governance perspective, you've gone, here's what we think we need to spend, but our delegated authority is way over here, and so I'm not saying you're going to do this, I'm saying what's possible. We can just go spend up to that and we don't need to tell you because it's in our delegated authority. So I just kind of think about what the reporting is that this committee wants when you've said this is where the budget is and there's such a massive gap. My expectation would not be that you just go spend up to that amount without some kind of reporting back to this committee. That's what I'm getting. I'm not saying I want to withdraw the money we've already approved. It's just around the reporting and the comfort levels when you've got a delegated authority that is much larger than what you've reported to us at this point is what is required.
So what I think is that you've got a new budget here, and at each meeting we'll be giving you a report against that budget, and while we're going through this process, we should know if something else is on its way, if something else is coming up, and at that point that needs to be flagged to you as well, that this needs to be added into the budget. And that's why we need to be forward thinking all the time.
I guess, sorry to labour this point, but I just want to no surprises thing here. I guess I've always struggled where you have, this is the budget, but this is your delegated authority, and all of a sudden you come back and the budget's been blown, and it's like, but we had a delegated authority, so it doesn't matter. That's what I'm trying to avoid here.
So I guess we could change the delegated authority, but, or we just forecast on a monthly basis as part of this to show where we're at against the budget.
Yeah, and I'm happy with that. I'm guessing, personally, I'm setting the expectation that you just don't come back and go, oh no, but we had that delegated authority, so we spent it all.
Yeah.
Could I perhaps explore just a solution here that I feel is in front of me, which might not be in front of you, is that, let's see, the shareholders agreement has got a little bit of a more detailed approach to the provision of this operational funding, and it envisages their intervals of budgets coming to the JSC. And so that, in conjunction with the interim statement, I see as being the appropriate tools, and I've suggested in the interim statement even procurement thresholds and so forth, so you could bake in those without interfering with the council's budget decision or the delegation per se.
I guess the challenge is here we're currently operating without a statement of expectations.
And the other thing that since we did this, even like this morning, we had a conversation about potentially needing to split the transition program into the water entity and the two councils. So when you look at page 40, actually I think we may have understated the amount of resource we might need to do some of this work. So we'll be coming back to you on that. It's quite clear to me now, unless the, we talk about the CSI, but actually we need to work out, have we got that split right, or are we understating it? Because I think about people transition, 42,000, it's actually going to cost more than that to get them across. And that's from council point of view. And it's only stuff we've only learnt this week, and it's after this has been done.
And I guess just to support what Nigel's saying, I hear the concern about spending more than the delegated authority, and no surprises. If there was a regular reporting mechanism on how we're tracking versus what the budget is and what's been incurred, at a broad category level, that would certainly give you the assurance that the money's going to the right buckets. And I think that's probably what's missing, is the reporting mechanism to give you that sense of comfort.
I suppose because Councillor Pies touched on the question that I was going to ask, and it was based, it sits in the space around when we first teased out what the numbers could look like. It was a very vague process, and a leap of faith, if you like. We had to put something down. So it really was a guesstimate. And versus now, we're dealing with some tighter numbers. Like there's this budget that you now put in front of us is obviously better thought through by virtue of the fact that it needs to now be, and so it's then the accountability piece between the budget as it's starting to sort of become more obvious versus this vague number that we all agree to, and that's the bit we're dancing around at the moment, I guess. And it's just and I think the answer is that monthly reports is now how we now journey with this budget.
Yep, and the intention is that at each of these meetings, we reforecast on that budget with an explanation of where we're at, and then where we may go out of those parameters, we then seek approval. Not that I can necessarily see that happening because we're constrained by time more than anything else. But and hopefully when I get to that summary proposed reporting pack at the end, you'll see how we intend to do that on a work stream basis. And this is a bottom-up budget that we've done with known and forecast costs, with the likes of the work that Andrew and Neil are working with, and rationale and those types of things, and Elliot with Simpson Grierson. What it is that there's uncertainty around those numbers, particularly with that legal work where it's the time and materials, but there's also unknowns as well that we don't have in here. So there's things that last week we had a workshop around the staff transition, something else comes up. So you unearth things as we go that we will add to this budget, because we don't know everything right now. But it's a much more solid estimate with cost inputs than it was previously.
So then how do we approve a budget when all I've heard is it's going to materially change? So I feel the recommendations today may be not quite adequate, so we may need to relook at that, because today we're supposed to approve an establishment budget, but all I've heard is this is not it. Is that correct?
I think this is a good start to the budget, so there's no reason why we couldn't do this at the moment. There's just things like last week, when we talk about the people, actually, this legislation baked in more than what you would anticipate is baked into it. And each time you look at the legislation, you go, oh, okay, we've got to do this slightly differently. So those are the things that we discover as we go. But for now, this is the best that you're going to get.
Yeah.
Because I had some questions around staffing, well, what are your words in here? Sorry. Employee costs total. So I just wondered, my first question just around that is, are we trying to effectively build a mature organisational sort of like structure during establishment? Because obviously the 1.9 million is leading into the 1st of July. So that's my first question. Are we trying to build this straight away in the establishment stage? And with regards to the cost, like, have we tested the timing of like the tier 2s, the permanent employees, the fixed term appointments to make sure that, you know, that are they all necessary when we do have a Timaru and a Mackenzie workforce leading into the 1st of July? Like, what actual work has been done on that leading into the 1st of July commencement?
So we're currently finalising the operation model. I've been talking to a number of CEs around the country. Last week I met with Coast Waters and I've met with Selwyn and Te Akiwai so that we can validate our operating model structure. And then we'll be talking to Andrew and Neil to get their validation on the water delivery side of it. But we also have the non-water delivery side of the organisation that needs to be built out. Someone's got to be accountable for payroll, financial management, HR, regulatory and compliance, billing, pricing strategy, and that is where we need to build up the organisation. And we need to do that in advance of day one. So the advice that we got from the other CEs is get your tier 2s in place as soon as possible. And then the goal is to run a parallel operation for 3 months before the go live, before the water services teams transfer in, just to make sure that, you know, we've seen in the media the problems that Te Akiwai and I think Selwyn as well have had with billing. But we want to minimise risk on day one. And I don't believe we can do that if we were to start the organisation on day one without building up that workforce first.
I agree with that. However, are we building new, or we already have these capabilities? So is it not a matter of transferring some of that from our current workforce, or are you visualising that this is new? So, for example, your HR, your payrolls, your whatever, are these new, or they're coming from existing?
No, they're new.
So we're going to have stranded...
Yes, so we need our organisation at the same time take reform out of the mix. We then need to look at all these departments and go finance, HR, all those sort of things.
That's exactly the work we're doing.
Yeah.
So we've got HR starting that, and we've got a person working with us to actually understand the legislation and then get out and understand, when I say, what are all the touch points with our current people to water. And we haven't done that fully yet. And then once we've got that, we'll be in a better position to understand, okay, what do the stranded overheads really look like? And some of it will be stranded.
I think the other thing to recognise is, you know, while we've got our existing workforce looking at bits and pieces like the people work stream, they also do need the external expertise. And I understand that, you know, that there will always be a component of where we're going to have to bring someone in who knows the legislation and who can help us, direct us so that we can then get the work in order. So I think it's important to realise that, you know, our people themselves are also got BAU to conduct as well. So they don't have an unlimited amount of time dedicated to the water entity. So it's finding that balance between the external help and the internal capacity that's there.
I feel
I'd suggest at our next meeting, in a closed session, we'll bring our HR people to come and walk you through exactly what we've got to do, because it's not straightforward.
Yeah, I was just going to say we'll pick up this. We can pick some of this up in PX to have a brief conversation for it to come to a future meeting. Obviously, that one affects people, so we'll just maybe stop that discussion now. If we go back to, is further questions on the paper? We'll go Mark and then...
There is, and it's just because this is these are the questions that come when you start watching, looking through a tighter budget. There's a whole lot of stuff drops out, and I didn't really ask the question previously well, and it was around surprises, and because very quickly CSI is going to form a view around where cost should lie, and council, and so as these surprises emerge. Do we have a template? Are we, because this is navigated, this has been navigated by other entities. Are we looking to see their work as to when those sort of crunchy conversations start to happen? Because it strikes me that the 40K that's sort of been allocated to Land Back and Council, may be a bit thin in relation to surprises, and so how do we set the terms of engagement around this?
Yeah, and on that point, I would, our wider councillor base would be of the assumption, because our original discussions were debt funded, the water entity would end up landing that, and then council would come up outside of council's own related cost. Council would come up out even effectively, get the other position from the water entity. This is the challenge, I think, that you're alluding to as you put in people that have to think of the water entity first as their obligations under law around what sets them up best. And there is a few sort of things that we've probably we've made some assumptions around, and that includes, where people might sit in the organisation within council-owned property, some of those sort of things. So I think you're right, we do need to sort of have that conversation sooner than later, just so we can...
I was just going to suggest, Justin and I thought it might be useful to go through that program plan now before we continue, which may stop further questions. Might just provide some extra clarity around stuff that you were kind of thinking anyway. Would you mind if we did that?
No, that's fine. I think there's a few things in here that probably can't be signed off until we do that. So I agree. I think that makes sense. So we'll just pause that and we'll go through to your report.
So the background of this report is I put this together, I called it a board report to Justin and the board, because it included work across transition and establishment. So some of the information was more relevant to you as a stakeholder group and others to the board. But if we just go to the first page, the landscape page, Alana. This is just my notes.
Page 3.
And we can forward this to you afterwards. But what I have done here is I've split out the program into 3 sections. So the first program is around transition, and these are the work streams that are of, I guess, relevance and fall within the governance directly of the JSC. So we have, whereas previously we had work streams that were functional, so all the things that finance were going to do, all the things that HR are going to do, we've now designed these so they relate to outcomes or milestones. So the foundation work stream looks at the process this committee goes through to the outcome is to make CSI Water a standalone entity, so it's incorporated, the shareholders agreement is enacted, and the interim statement of expectations is issued. And then we have included a budget in that, and then a forecast. So this is the forecast will be updated each JSC, so you can see where we're at against that forecast. And then a status for where that work stream's at overall. And then what I have put in that column under decisions needed is I have pulled out what I think are the decisions that this governance group or the board governance group need to make to reach those milestones. So we go down, so there's the foundation, there's independence, which is our GFA accession process. transfer, which is the transfer agreement right through until the 1st of July next year, which has a lot of the registers in it that you were talking about earlier. People transition, which is the piece of work that Nigel, Angela and I have been leading with some external support around how do we transfer the staff, and then program management. And then we have it split out separately around the activities that are solely to do with establishing the water entity. So operating model, customer and billing, which is a really big one. Facilities and infrastructure, so where's the organisation going to operate out of? IT systems and data, strategy, comms and engagement, and the water services strategy, which is what a lot of the inputs that Andrew and Neil and his team are working towards to get that submission state at 1st of July next year. And then the third program is the establishment FTE, and that's how we build up the organisation for day one to ensure that we have service delivery continuity and minimise risks for day one delivery. So we've split it out into those 3 different work streams, and the idea is we update each of those forecasts monthly. And then Alana, if you wouldn't mind going to the first template as an example, what I have then put together is an overview of each of those work streams. So it has the budget, costs incurred to date, forecast, and then for each work stream, the key activities since the last JSC, what's due before the next JSC, the milestones throughout that work stream, and then a repeat down below is the decisions needed for each work stream and the key risks there. So the idea is that this will be updated. There's one of these templates for each of the work streams, and there's a bit of an overview up front from myself, and Justin will probably put something in there as well, and then this will be issued. This will supersede that PMO report that you've had previously, and so this should have all the timelines of what you're expecting, where the budgets are, where the forecasts, where the costs are incurred. And so you should get greater clarity across all those work streams on a 6-weekly basis.
Just one thing that I would find useful is where you've got at risk, is that budget is at risk or timeline is at risk?
Good question. So far, this is timeline. Yeah, I've only incorporated timeline into it so far. But we have spend to date up the top, yeah. So there's one of those for each work streams, and then the plan is that that's how we would inform you for each JSC on the progress that we're making. Does that sort of make a bit more sense now as to what we were talking about earlier?
You're talking... Just wondering if I can ask a question, please.
Yep, go for it.
Sorry, I don't know what's going on with my camera, but I'm not there. But now, I just want to ask a question around, really good that we're seeing these milestones put in place, but what concerns me is, and I'll just ask a question, I made an assumption here also. I'm assuming that Justin is fully engaged in these milestones and timelines. I don't know whether he's in the room there today. I can't see.
No, he's...
The question I have is, we're making assumptions here that some of these milestones are going to work in conjunction with allowance in here for our UCE to have some input into this. And I'm just a little bit concerned that while it's good to have these milestones, we haven't got UCE on board yet, and he may well have a different idea when he gets on board, assuming he does.
Do you want to answer that,
Yep, sure. So I'm working very closely with Justin. We meet a couple of times a week. So I think that we're aligned in our thinking, and Justin's nodding.
Yeah, I've certainly been through all these papers with Catherine. Look, I think Catherine's the work to date, this paper brings a lot of structure to what we're trying to achieve and a lot of clarity. So, you know, sorry for not delivering it in your meeting papers, but I'm certainly really comfortable with the 3 key work streams as presented here. I think that we can report with real clarity on that for you. The question about the new CE, that person I hope will be with us by the end of October, And certainly leading into that, there's the opportunity to run the operating structure past them. Catherine and I have got an engagement process with existing Mackenzie and Timaru teams, the senior teams, to kind of work through and test the operating structure with them. And so I'm feeling comfortable that where we'll land, the new CE will have ample opportunity to help shape that.
All right, thanks for that, Justin. I just wanted some reassurance because obviously this is going to be on your head very soon. So sorry for being blunt, but there is a high level of expectation for this to succeed. And I'm hearing that we need more money, we need more of this and more of that. So yeah, there's obviously going to be a little bit of pressure ramping up on you, if not now, but very shortly.
Thanks for that. That's understood. That's totally understood and totally appreciated. I think the other thing that I like about the way, kind of Catherine has presented the paper is just that, there are, the formative through to accession, that's quite a moment. And so where those costs lie pre and post is probably, the next most important decision to come to, is it going to be equity, is it going to be... and so perhaps we could, unless there are questions here, perhaps we could move to that discussion.
Yeah, I'll go Councillor Guerin and then Councillor Pye as far as questions, then we can move that on. Oh, I'm sorry, and then Angela.
Yeah, so my question, you spoke about 6 reporting. Is that specifically for the budget or just reporting? Because I would have thought in a fast-moving new entity, 4 weekly might be more appropriate.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm updating this as I go all the time because things are happening. I just thought 6 weekly sort of aligned with JSC. So I'm open to any time, whatever time horizons, it's fine.
Thank you. Councillor Pye, and then I'll bring Angela in.
So again, I just had a question/comment, and it's based on the fact we don't have a statement of expectations now. And I'm just using this as an example, but in here you've got around facilities and infrastructure and premises and things, which I understand you'd need. But I'm conscious that, we may have stranded assets. And I'm also conscious that, especially you, Justin, being the sole director, need to work in the best interest of the water company. But how can we balance that? And I think it's something we need to put some thought into the statement of expectations, in that, personally, my expectation would be that where you can assist the councils from not having stranded assets, that would be useful.
Sure. I just want to reframe that. I don't think we have stranded assets. We may have stranded costs, and they're fundamentally different.
No, I think there's both, and so there's what Mark and Michelle are both alluding to. So as an example, premises, staff are downstairs, they might want to move off-site, that's fine, but council actually is the owner of buildings as well. So can you minimise costs by, putting them into one of our buildings versus, an external building, those sort of things. I just think I think they're discussions that we just still need to have. That doesn't need to be answered.
Looking from the company's perspective, this isn't your standard purchase or acquisition of assets. This is a closely held process. And so you can expect us to work closely with the chief executive of both organisations to work through so that there are no surprises when we get here. We're certainly conscious of cost, we're conscious of time frame, we're conscious of the team and the assets that council has. So we're not building an empire here.
Angela.
I'd just like to say, I think the report that we're getting now is actually a really good project report. It actually gives us the critical stages. It gives us the gates that we have to meet and when we have to meet. So we've got a really good idea of timeline. It also gives us the budget, and it also gives us how we're tracking to that. And I think that's really important for us there's no surprises then if it gets reported. I think the other thing equally as important is how are we doing on the other side, which is the council in-house side that Nigel and I have spoken about, because I think there's a lot of work in here to support that work stream. And I think there will be costs that land with council, and we do need to have a sense of a bit of a similar kind of report for the in-house work.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so let's go to effectively equity debt conversation, isn't it? As far as where those costs lie. And one challenge that I have, and Elliot, you might be able to answer this for me, but is that it's not just a discussion of this committee. I feel like it's a council decision, yes?
Yes. My advice is that this committee should work through the different dimensions of this company funding arrangement and identify essentially the scope of that facility, and then a paper would go to the councils recommending the implementation of that policy through amendments to the commitment agreement and reflected in the shareholders agreement. There's just one legal thing I do need to mention, which is that the councils currently are water services providers and therefore have different financial principles, and they're in Section 18 of the Act, and they essentially are that water revenue pays for revenue water costs and transparency to its communities. And so just noting that actually the financial principles are no longer the Section 101 ones, they are the ones in the Local Government Water Services Act.
Thank you. Justin, I'll throw the floor to you to lead us in, if you like.
This might be a bit of a tag team exercise between Catherine and I, but essentially what Catherine's done, and I agree with the thinking, is to create what are the costs up to a session, all right? And so those costs are truly about standing up an organisation and getting it to a point where it's able to function. It can't really function prior to that. After that, the costs are all about getting the organisation functioning, and they are actually costs at the organisation. So it forms quite a nice gateway to, in my mind, as to what's debt and what's equity. So, there's risk capital being put up, to get the organisation loaded up, organised, set up, debt in place. We know what we're doing, and then there's actually a business, and then there's the run-in cost to actually get operational. And so, in simple terms, what Catherine's proposing in the paper, which I agree with, is one's equity and the other one's debt. And one's a cost that I think is, fairly borne by, water customers in the future, and one's a cost that is actually representative of shareholders getting an organisation going. So that's my simple summary. Catherine, do you want to add anything to that?
So if we're comparing it to a business situation, effectively it's the parent wearing the cost to a point to make sure that we're setting the child up for success.
Then it's stand alone and it has resources of its own and able to function.
Yeah.
So right from the go, that was the sort of conversation that I was putting forward and thinking about. However, the equity in this water organisation has always been treated as the net of all assets and liabilities, and that becomes the equity. So effectively that is all our assets, all the liabilities in terms of creditors and so forth, and at that point we also decided that setting up the organisation would be one of those potential costs that gets netted against the assets, and then our equity as shareholders would be the net. So that goes slightly different to what you're saying. If you were setting up your own business, you put in equity, okay? You'd have a mix of equity and a mix of debt. You go to your banker. This is slightly different because we're putting up our equity, which is the net number, and there will be loans as well. It's making sure that those are actually in equilibrium. Because, quite frankly, the two councils don't have the cash to put in as equity. So they've decided instead to actually borrow against their assets to actually give the net equity. And possibly it needs a paper. It needs a paper to set that out really well with some examples, and we could easily do that.
Yeah, and it is a bit of a balancing act, because although, take the point, you've got to look at what's in the best interests of the company, we also have to have the lens around what's best for council in the future state. So I think it probably needs some further underlying analysis. Although on the scale of things, I shouldn't say this, but relative to what we're dealing with, it's more than minor, but it's not not that significant.
We're talking about $1.3 million, and the proposal is that would add to the equity. So your points are well made, Nigel. The assets and the liabilities come across. That forms a certain amount of equity, and then what we're doing is we're talking about the establishment costs to get the company stood up to the point where the company can buy those assets and have equity, borrow money, buy those, repay the council's debt, take its own debt on board. Then there's an additional $1.3 million to get the company to the point where it can actually undertake that transaction. And the suggestion in the papers is that be also regarded as equity, split between the two local authorities. Operational costs after that become operating costs of the companies. So for clarity, that's what's being proposed.
What's our return on this extra equity? You don't need to answer that, just like...
Well, that's why we need the paper, because I couch it different to you. And that's why I think the paper needs to come up, because we constantly talked about the net being the equity, not putting extra in on top. I think we're saying a similar thing, but it's...
The issue there is whether that's, again, it's just a debt or equity discussion, isn't it? And at one level, I'm slightly ambivalent, but at another level, who we're talking about is ratepayers versus water customers, as to which group should pay that, and so whether it's appropriate for the company to be trying to recoup and pay for a start-up cost is kind of the issue.
And ultimately, it's one group. So
I think, just
where
if
the
I
cost
could,
lands. Yeah.
so I think once we've actually established, the full picture of what councils are going to look like without water and what goes across, I think that has to come back to both councils so that both councils are aware of how that impacts our organisations, and that would also then be reflected in the transfer agreement as well, and part of the LGFA accession.
And I also think that when we look at the budget that we had, actually you can see most of it's loaded on the water entity. Now, is that correct? And that debate has to be had as well.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Elliot.
Through the Chair, I just need to note that the Commerce Commission hasn't looked at this type of arrangement from price path regulation, so that's of course downstream, but I just need to note that's an unknown impact of these different arrangements on those subsequent regulatory steps. I just wanted to note that. The other thing I think is worth identifying here is that I do think that the facility should go further than Ascension. We're not guaranteed, establishment finance, we're not guaranteed that we will get that or that we might want that, and so therefore the arrangement I think should actually just foresee the potential of needing to go through until the transfer date. I could potentially usefully discuss sort of next steps with this, how I'm seeing it, but I'm not sure where we are with the conversation.
No, anything further on that? My only thing is really around the recommendation is we probably just can't agree specifically because it's a conversation back to council, so we just need to tweak that, which is fine.
I'm sorry, but I just wonder if we can work through the recommendations and actually understand exactly what we're agreeing to, because I'm I'm still not 100% clear, and given some of the conversation, I'm not sure that I'm ready to make a decision on some of the.
Yeah, that's fine. Did you want to talk to, no, because this,
That's sensible. Essentially, the collective sort of sentiment around these would then, I believe, formulate the basis for the council's papers that we would then put in front of them for a decision, and then that would be reflected in the drafting. Yeah.
yeah, no, that's all good. That was going to be my approach anyway, because it's rather complex. So then we'll go to the top recommendation, which is the establishment budget. We've had good conversation around that, around reporting and other elements. With that specific one, are we all reasonably comfortable? Because what I'll do is I'll work through them. If we're comfortable to a point, then we'll group it and move it forward, and then we can break any individual one that we have some contention on and work with that separately. So everyone reasonably comfortable with the top one? Yeah.
Sorry, yes, but I just wondered, how does that impact on 5? Because I think what I just heard from Elliot, that your suggestion is actually funding it till 1 July. Is that what I'm hearing? Instead of getting that establishment, relying on that?
Yes, that as it's not guaranteed that we will get establishment funding, or that it would be on terms that we would be satisfied with, and I'm just cautioning drawing it short, that's all.
The other risk sorry, where other councils are in the process as well. So we've signalled now, we've told them we want to get going, but if other councils get in before us, we could be in a queue. So although we are aiming for end of December or end of the year, for a number of reasons that could extend.
Doesn't necessarily change the cost in total, just the allocation point.
Which is not the end of the world. So, I mean, that number 5 just notes relative to the 1st of January, so it doesn't, to Elliot's point, we can go over that, but this is only dealing with that time period, so I think it's probably separate in that regard. So if we go back to 2, adopts the 3 cost categories.
Sorry, where were those cost categories in section 3? I don't. Section 3 that confused me, and then I thought I'll find it by the time I get to the end of the paper. I've got to go back and look. But.
And those categories are the ones consistent with how we promised to report in that other document that we brought up.
Cool, everyone reasonably comfortable with that one? And then 3rd is the common start date. I think that's probably all okay as far as September the 3rd. Number 4 confirms that council fund all establishment costs to LGFA accession, that Central CSI Water funds its own costs from that date. Everyone comfortable with that? How it interplays?
I'm not sure about the no interest, sorry, because I think TDC are probably funding more of this than Mackenzie District Council are, and is that fair that no interest is paid? And I get the complexity of, calculating interest on a daily basis, but I'm not sure that we're being fair to our ratepayers if we're not getting interest on that funding. If it was in proportion, 100% agree, but it's not.
Yeah, Elliot and I had that conversation too. I was removing complexity, you were being accountable to ratepayers.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the end of the world, that's easy enough to work out. I'd be comfortable along those lines that we, make a change that interest accrues. Is that the thinking of the room? Do you want to make, sorry Justin, were you reaching for, no, you're okay.
I mean, my advice is that interest should accrue, and that's how I've drafted the shareholders agreement. And
Yep.
I'll just add one other thing, just with that, it should be LGFA extension or 1 July 27, just to accommodate that eventuality we were discussing before.
Okay. So everyone comfortable with making that change? Yeah. And then 5 was the one to 1st of Jan. So let's maybe move the 1 through 5 as a group. Is everyone comfortable with that? Just so we can feel like we've achieved something. Yes. Small steps, small wins. I'm happy to move that from the chair 1 through 5. Is there a seconder? Councillor Adams? Yeah, perfect. If there's no discussion, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Alrighty. Okay, so treated as equity or etc. That's the key one. We just need to make a change around noting conversation or something. Elliot, have you got a suggestion? It's really just to go back to councils.
I think we should park number 6 until we've actually brought a paper of how the balance sheet might be structured.
Nigel?
Because otherwise we're making a resolution here without going slightly deeper into it. And I think we have to.
Perhaps this committee would want to note that this would be explored and options put in front of the councils for determination.
Yeah, for consideration.
Cool.
Yeah.
And I'll just note that that resolution, it's amendments to the commitment agreement, not the correction of the shareholders agreement. That's a minor detail.
Yeah. Did you pick that up? Kind of. That's so do you want to just read that back, Elliot, just as far as a rough resolution?
From me, Chair?
Yeah.
Yes, notes that the treatment of the council's establishment costs, options for the treatment of the council's establishment costs will be provided to the councils with analysis and enabling recommendations for amendment to the commitment agreement and shareholders agreement.
Perfect. There we go. We've recorded that anyway. So everyone generally comfortable with that? And then we'll go to have a look at 7. So that's just the coding. That was later on. And then was there any questions on the coding? No. And then 8 is just note. Mackenzie has approved further funding in the annual plan. So there shouldn't be any discussion on that. So based on that, we can probably put the new 6, 7 and 8 together. Oh, so we changed 6, sorry. Yeah. Okay with that? Yep, I'm happy to move that from the chair. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Pye. No further discussion. Put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. We'll just go back now to 7.2 on page 23. Just we'll pick up what we need to do there, if anything. I think it was a note. Yep, so it's just a note report. Do you want any? Is there any further discussion from? Yeah, go for it.
And I should know this because I've been part of all the conversations, but what further information do we need to make a decision about downlands?
I don't think there's further information. It's actually having the conversation with the other parties and getting the other party to actually come to a decision.
Yeah, so maybe my question should have been, what needs to happen to enable us to make a decision?
Through the chair, but in my view, it's a firm direction from Waimate as to which way they want to go, and then just to start negotiating whichever option they want to do. Currently, there is no clear direction from Waimate, from what I understand, as to whether or not they would want to do a partial transfer. I don't actually think it's reasonably practicable anymore. And then it's really a question of actually drafting the updated agreement drafting an update to our agreement that we currently have for it to comply. And the working through the intricacies of that are going to be challenging, but are all, I believe, surmountable. They should not be no's, they will just require technical responses. Yeah.
We're meeting with them this afternoon at 1.
Alrighty, okay. Anything further on 7.2? Otherwise, just for the record, we just need to receive a note. No, all gone through your notes, all good. Just grab a mover and a seconder for that, please. Yeah, thank you, Councillor Pye. Councillor Guerin, thank you. If there's no further discussion, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. So that tackles that. Just minor nature, and before we go into PX, we just wanted a quick discussion on director appointments. Obviously, we probably need to move that at some pace now. So more as far as an action plan, we can probably move that along pretty quickly, but perhaps, Justin, we need to have a discussion around the advert matrix, etc., what exactly we're looking forward and get that through, agree a process. But we can sort of duplicate what we've done previously, but we just, a couple of things we need to agree. So perhaps we, what's your thinking? Perhaps we just need a offline meeting between Justin, yourself and Mackenzie Tamaru, and we just need to get that in the diary pretty quickly, I think. That'd be an action? Yeah, okay. So I'll talk to maybe Alicia afterwards to move that along. Yeah.
And just make the point everybody understands that this is being brought forward because LGFA want to see the board in place prior to, and of course with a fair amount of debt in the organisation, directors will also be interested to be appointed prior to, so they understand the terms, the obligations, what they're being signed up for.
Yeah,
so
100%.
There's kind of a dual purpose to it.
No, I always sort of thought it would need to come forward, so don't want any surprises for the new directors. No, all good, so we'll take that offline. So there was nothing else as far as minor nature. We move now to exclusion of the public. Happy to move that from the chair, Councillor Adams. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. We'll just pause for a few minutes.